Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Brought to you by the good people at Polyhymnia. Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I have some email from listener Joseph Clay. He says, yesterday I heard someone talk about the Social Security barbell, which essentially was that a very large chunk of baby boomers will be dying in the next decade, and there's not much population behind them that will be retiring. So the program isn't in nearly as bad shape as some say. And he's curious of our thoughts on the matter, specifically this question: will the declining population have a large impact on Social Security's viability? The answer here is probably not. Population changes do have short-term effects, so we're expected to get this deficit with Social Security over the next 10 years, plus or minus, and then the deficit declines a bit, and I think that might be the barbell that Joseph is referring to before it gets larger again. So over the short term, population changes will give you this, but long term, viability comes down not to the size of the population, but to the ratio of workers to retirees. And here it starts to look bleak. In 1960, we had 5 workers for every 1 retiree. In 2010, we dropped below the 3-to-1 ratio that keeps Social Security solvent. So today we're below 3-to-1, and we're projected to stabilize at 2.5 workers to every 1 retiree. And it gets even worse still, because that 5-to-1 or 2.5-to-1 or whatever you're talking about was based on historical longevity rates. What's happening now is people are living longer, and we aren't pushing up the retirement age. And I have some numbers. In 1940, the retirement age was 65, and the average male who retired at 65 was expected to live 12 more years. Today, retirement age is bumped up a bit. It's 67, but the average male who retires at 65 is projected to live 17 more years. So we've advanced the retirement age by 2 years, but longevity has advanced by 5 years. Oh, and it gets worse because females have an even longer life expectancy. They're expected to live for 19 years after age 65. And back in the 1940s, not many females were in the workforce. As time goes by, you get more and more of them, so that makes the problem even worse and worse.
You know, this flies in the face, Ant, of 2 things. I'll start with the more humorous of the 2, I guess. I keep reading on my Facebook and Twitter feeds how those of us who got vaccinated against COVID, we're all going to start dying wholesale sometime very, very soon. Undoubtedly, you've heard this too.
Right. I keep waiting to keel over, but nothing happens.
I keep waiting for you to keel over too. But on the less amusing side of this particular street, life expectancy in the U.S. is declining.
Is it really?
First time in a very long time.
All right, now here's the thing. I don't know the numbers, but anyone who's interested, be careful, because you have to ask, where are they measuring it from? Because you get very different answers if you measure life expectancy from birth versus life expectancy from 1 year old versus age 65 or what have you.
My understanding, and don't hold me to this exactly, but my understanding is that we're down a couple of years regardless.
Oh, really? Regardless of how you measure it? Huh.
And, you know, a lot of people point to various drug problems that we've had, things like this, right, that cut people down when they're young, which is generally where declines of this sort come from. Anyway, as interesting as all that is, I want to ask you, Ant, to start thinking about what you're going to do. Well, I guess the date is just, June 24th. What are you doing on June 24th?
June 24th of this year? Nothing that I know about.
Well, Standard Tuesday for you, but it's a big deal for those of us who like to engage in boycotts.
Okay.
And you and I covered boycotts not too terribly long ago and how they generally don't amount to much of anything, and I don't suspect this one's going to either. But there is a called-for boycott against McDonald's on June 24th.
What have they done?
Well, their prices have gotten a touch out of hand.
Okay.
Give you an idea of what those prices look like. The average cost of a Big Mac right now in the U.S. tends to be between $4.67 and $6.72.
Okay.
That's kind of expensive.
The $6.72 sounds that way. $4.67, not so much.
Well, the most expensive Big Mac, I'll give you two guesses. One, how expensive is the most expensive Big Mac? And two, where?
Oh, I'd say $10, and I would say somewhere in Connecticut or New York City, perhaps.
Well, how about you? It's Darien, Connecticut.
Ooh, all right.
So kind of New York and Connecticut.
Right.
All wrapped up into one. It's on the Gold Coast of Connecticut. My home state where I grew up, obviously I did not grow up in Darien. If I did, I would already have retired. But the price in Darien is $18.
Oh, my God. $18.
Sweet Lord in heaven, who pays $18 for a Big Mac?
Well, see, and this is the thing. James did not tip me off. I said Connecticut because I used to live in upstate New York. And, of course, everything in New York City is expensive and, by extension, into Connecticut. But it seemed to me the rich people moved out to Connecticut. So you got the double whammy of things being more expensive and people being able to afford it.
Yeah, there's all kinds of economic problems in Connecticut that are brought about by exactly this issue. Proximity to New York City, right?
Yeah. But $18.
$18, my God. I don't know that I'd pay $18 for a good hamburger.
Right, yeah, yeah.
So, okay, we're going to have a boycott to try to make a point about prices, I guess. It's the same group that boycotted Walmart once upon a time and, what's the other one, Target. So I don't suspect this is going to work all that much.
Let me point out that people who think that $4 or $6 or $18, whatever it is, people who think that's too expensive are already boycotting. They aren't buying these things.
That's right. This is not going to help them at all. And we've gotten to the point now where, you know, I drift into a fast food place from time to time when I'm traveling typically. And boy, it's gotten really out of hand, the prices.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really crazy. Most of them aren't $18 Big Mac crazy. But you're not getting screaming hot deals at any fast food places anymore.
No, but you know where I am starting to find the good deals and the great food is in food trucks at truck stops.
But that's a little too specific. I like the idea of food trucks. I don't like the idea of you drifting from truck stop to find something to eat.
Yeah, on my travels now in Virginia, I frequent Interstate 80, which of course has lots of trucks and lots of truck stops. And what you find is that there's a huge population of Indians who have come to this country who drive trucks. And so what's happening? They want food, and they like Indian food, of course, and so there's a demand for that. So all of a sudden now there's a bunch of Indian food trucks at truck stops. You get some really good stuff.
I'm surprised the truck stops let that happen. Truck stops always have restaurants inside.
Yeah, I don't know how this works. The one we stopped at recently, the food truck was across the street on what was clearly some other piece of property.
Yeah, smart. We actually have, not surprisingly, a lot of food trucks here in Tucson. And Indian, some. Mexican, more often than not. Whatever the local market wants, it's cheaper to buy a food truck than to open a restaurant.
Right, yeah.
I'm happy to work my way through the food trucks here one at a time. The food isn't uniformly outstanding, but damn near.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how the boycott goes.
I predict it's going to do exactly nothing.
I predict the same. So the interesting thing will be, can McDonald's hang on? Or have they priced themselves out of their own market? And I think they might have.
I don't know. I would imagine McDonald's has at its fingertips a wealth of coast-to-coast data. If anybody's going to get pricing right, it's going to be those guys. I mean, if anything, this boycott may have the opposite effect because all of this talk, I haven't had a Big Mac in years, but I kind of want to go buy one now.
I would also like a Big Mac.
Yeah.
Look, they're not the best burger in the world, but they're interesting, they're pretty good, and they're almost always exactly the same.
Exactly the same, right. It tastes not just the same McDonald's to McDonald's, but in my memory, the Big Mac I had when I was 11 is the same as this one.
I don't want to burst your bubble here, but the Big Mac you had when you were 11 had a lot more beef on it than it has now.
Maybe so. I was just had smaller hands then, James.
I don't know. Your hands are kind of tiny and delicate even now. Even now. This, of course, brings us to the foolishness.
Oh, my God. We haven't even gotten to the foolishness yet.
We haven't even gotten there yet. And I'm going to point to Louisiana, but I'm also going to point to 11 other states that I will not name, but you can go look up in the show notes if you want. And I'm going to name Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Do you have any idea what all this might add up to?
Nope, not a clue.
12 states across the fruited plain, Ant, have legislation either passed or in the works making illegal chemtrails.
I would imagine they're already illegal, right?
Well, they don't have to be illegal. They don't exist. I can sense the hate mail coming in already, but they don't. They just don't. And we're wasting a lot of time trying to figure out how to address this legislatively.
If they did, the EPA would have a lot to say about that. Environmental groups would have a lot to say about that.
You would think. But of course, they're all either in on the conspiracy. God, I hate.
Like you're on the take.
That's. Am I? Because I would like to be. People, just go ahead. Who would be mailing a check in this respect? Who's responsible for the chemtrails? They, always them.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
And I teased a little bit last week, which, not to peel away the curtain too much, last week was recorded about 8 minutes ago. I said, we'll get back to this idea of what was it exactly, how many hours people work and this sort of thing, right? Isn't it interesting? Because you and I have talked about this for years. And it's long been my belief that most people in office settings work about 3-4 hours a day at the most.
Yeah.
You think that's about right still?
Take out the coffee time and the useless meetings and yeah. I'd say 4 to 5 maybe.
You're being very generous. You and your people must work hard where you live.
Well, I can tell you this. When I've got some serious deadlines and I absolutely positively have to get work done, I stay home and do it.
Interesting.
I can get way more done remotely than I can in person. But, I mean, there are negatives to that as well.
Oh, there's positives and negatives to everything, right? Life is about trade-offs. But Microsoft put out a report not too terribly long ago asserting that American workers are stuck in what they call an infinite workday. Because from the minute you wake up until the minute you go to bed, you're pinged 100 different ways.
Really?
And as much as I think people work 3 hours a day, more or less, I also know that people do get, and not everybody, but many people get hundreds of emails and messages a day. And that does start to reek of an infinite workday, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you're never off the clock, right, if there's never not a screen in front of you or in your hand, then you are, by definition, always working.
Yeah, right.
To one degree or another. So what do we make of that?
Yeah, so how many hours are people working?
Well, I don't know, but there's 2,080 in a full-time work year. And I don't think people are working anywhere near as many hours as 2,080. Having said that, I get 300 emails a day.
Isn't there some country, I want to say one of the Scandinavian countries, that recently tried, maybe it was Iceland, that tried a 4-day work week and determined it actually worked better?
Of course it works better.
People were more productive, yeah.
And they're happier. And happy people tend to be more productive long term.
Right, right.
Right? And who the hell doesn't want a 3-day weekend every weekend? Or 2 days on a weekend and 1 day during the week. Maybe that makes more sense. But, man, an infinite workday.
I could recall...
I can sense that.
Well,
I can sense that there's something right about this.
Weirdly, when I was in academia, it was that. I was constantly working. And in part, it was the nature of the job. If I wasn't teaching or answering students, I was writing articles, or I was dealing with you, or we were traveling somewhere. So it was constant work. Since I've transitioned to my current position, I have to say my employers are really good about not invading personal space. I get no emails out of work hours. Nobody bothers me on holidays, which I kind of feel, if anything, I feel the opposite, because I'll want to work on something and I feel badly, I shouldn't email people because it's the weekend and they don't email me.
Well, the interesting thing here, and there were a number of interesting things in this report, but one of them that really caught me, I never really thought about it, but you and I know this to be true. Meetings are almost always a waste of everybody's time, but now nearly a third of all business meetings take place across multiple time zones.
Yeah.
And meetings that take place after 8 p.m. have increased 16% year over year.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, because if you've got multiple time zones, by definition, you're going to be impinging on somebody's free time.
Somebody's not going to do all that well with this nonsense. But here's the thing. If you're only working 3 hours a day, I think I can be right, and this can be right too. It's just pushing the hours around in strange and wondrous ways.
Right.
But the real question becomes, what should the expectation be?
Right. Yes, we've inherited this 8 hours going back maybe 100 years.
Well, it's a third of the day, right? A third of the day to work, a third of the day to sleep, and a third of the day to family. This is very typically how people, as a matter of fact, I've just given you one of the chief lessons of Freemasonry.
Huh.
Can't tell you any more, of course. But you take the point. But if we're just shifting time around, maybe that has to be. Maybe we're all on call 24 hours a day, but not working that much.
I see. Right.
Maybe that's the better way of looking at this.
Well, yeah, and that kind of matches with the office experience, that if you're in the office for 8 hours, but you're really only doing, let's say, 5 hours of productive work, basically you're on call for the other 3.
Yeah. And look, there's something to be said about building corporate culture that only happens if you're together.
Right.
So, in some respect, even if you're not working, you're still doing something that the company wants and needs you to do.
Yeah, I've come to really appreciate that, but also to realize that it doesn't happen nearly as much as what you might think, given the proponents.
Yeah. Oh, I think that goes without saying. Look, you and I have done our work together in our own homes for a decade.
Right, yeah.
Maybe close to 2 at this point. Has it been that long? Oh, my God, it has. Yeah. You can do this if you want to. Now, whether your employer wants to let you is an open question. I don't know. But I wonder, right, here, let me read to you a little bit. According to Microsoft's data, employees are interrupted every 2 minutes by meetings, emails, or messages, and receive an average of 117 emails and 153 Teams messages each workday.
Huh. The email numbers sound high, but the interruptions do not.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although I'm up into the 200 and 300s in emails from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from time to time, yeah.
I think Microsoft saying 153 Teams messages every day is a little self-serving. I have never in my life had a Teams message.
Now, I thought you were going to go with this whole conversation in a different direction. I want to throw it out here before it leaves my head. And that is, we live in a weird space, a space unlike humans have ever lived in before, that here in the United States, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it's got to be in the millions. Millions of people who don't work. And I don't mean stay-at-home parents. I mean the household has no means of income other than welfare, government support, that kind of thing. We have become so incredibly rich, incredibly productive that we as a country can support millions of people who don't work. Now, prior to maybe 150 years ago, those millions of people would die. Because if you didn't work, you didn't eat. That's just the way life was. But we've become so productive we can do that. So here's my question. Is it possible we're on the verge of becoming so productive that almost nobody needs to work? Or we need to work a couple of hours a day and that's it?
Maybe. And, we started thinking about universal basic income a long time ago. It's a pretty safe assertion that neither of us was all that thrilled with it.
Yeah.
Theoretically, right?
I thought it was better than the current welfare system, but yeah, I wasn't thrilled.
Right, and we talked about if you could throw out every single kind of welfare and replace it with this, we'd all be better off.
Yeah.
And only for efficiency's sake, right? It's just more efficient to do this than to do what we do. And we would put out legions of bean counters out of work.
Yep, right.
And then they'd end up on the universal basic income too. And what you would end up with, I think, is a two-tier society, right? People who looked at the UBI and said, good enough for me. Mm-hmm. And other people who looked at it and said, I'd really rather still be wealthy. What do I have to do to accomplish that?
Right.
Because a UBI isn't going to make people wealthy by present-day standards. They're going to make people wealthy by the standards of 100 years ago.
Right, yeah.
But not by present-day standards. So the question becomes, what do you think about this now? Has your mind changed on it in any way?
I can't say that I like it so much as saying that I think it's inevitable. I think, particularly with where I see AI going, and if we get similar technological advances like that, I could see, maybe not in our lifetimes, but in our kids' lifetimes,
maybe
people not having to work, that you could have a middle-class existence simply off of the productivity of the machines and the computers.
Yeah, maybe so. Would you still work if you could get a UBI?
Yeah, I think so, for a couple of reasons. One, I like doing what I do. Maybe I do some things differently. But two, there's always, we're both entrepreneurial. I'd look at my 24 hours of free time and say, look, I'd happily give up 2 of them in exchange for some more money, right? And then 2 becomes 3.
What kind of cool stuff can I do now that I don't have to worry about all this other stuff?
Right.
And look, that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm right in my assertion that most people in the offices, and I don't think this applies to people in factories, right? I think you just need people there to do certain things. But in offices, you could be damn near anywhere you want to be, and you can probably get away with just a few hours a day.
Yep.
So maybe it's the case people in factories should start making a lot more than people who work in offices.
I think that's coming. I think it's coming, James.
I think it's coming as well. And I think that's just fine. Especially when I think about people who want to get into the trades instead of getting into, kind of white-collar work, I think they should get more.
Yeah.
They work harder. And now it means the same thing, I think, to say I work harder and I'm more valuable. Whereas it wasn't always the same thing. Working harder didn't always make you more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly never will always make you more valuable, right? There's always going to be somebody who can accomplish in an hour what it takes you a week.
Right.
And that guy is going to be very well paid. But, man, all of a sudden, plumbers make more. Why shouldn't it be that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We all need plumbers more than we need office workers.
Part of that is what's been happening for the past 40, 50 years. We've been shoving people into college. And now we've got too many. We have more college-educated people than we need versus people who are educated in the trades. Good case in point, I've got 6 kids. 5 of them went to college and graduate school. 1 of them went to study aircraft maintenance. And that one guy makes more than all the rest of them.
That seems right, but aircraft maintenance is way more important. And I want to be clear, I'm drifting outside of what your children have done. So this is not a criticism of them. Although if you want to criticize your own children, we could do that later. If an aircraft mechanic is more valuable than somebody with a degree in Elizabethan poetry.
Yeah, right. Let me give you some different words here, because the Elizabethan poetry people just blew gaskets.
They're not listening in.
Some of them might be. Here's a good example. So the aircraft maintenance guy versus someone who takes care of your children at the daycare center, right? What could be more important than your children? And how can you say the aircraft maintenance is more valuable? Here's the thing.
Right.
Those aren't the words I'd use. I would say we have so many people willing and able to take care of children, and so few people willing and able to fix aircraft engines, that having one more of the aircraft engine guy is more valuable than having one more of the person who watches the children.
Yeah, no, look, watching children is a big deal. Incredibly important. There's just no shortage of people who are qualified to do it.
Right, and that's what determines the market wage, or any market price for that matter, is how valuable is one more of the thing. What does it take to get one more of these? It's not a reflection of the inherent value of the thing.
Yeah, this is the marginal revolution.
Right, yeah. Once we got our heads around that, we start to understand economics a whole lot better.
I think that's right. And yet, I don't know where I stand right now on these sorts of things, right? Because it seems that people do very little work in terms of hours. It also seems like we're all expected to be on the clock 18 to 24 hours a day. Well, those two things can, in fact, both be true. It's just a strange set of circumstances that yields that outcome.
Yeah, and I think it's going to change with this younger generation. What is the name of it? Is it millennials? No, it's not millennials. It's Gen Z.
No, that hasn't been right for a long time.
Right,
I don't even think that's right anymore.
Yeah, well, Gen Z are the ones that are coming up the ranks now. They're the first ones that have kind of like flipped the bird to the whole 40 hours a week thing. When they get into senior management positions, I think the working world will start to look a lot different.
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. And what you're looking for is actually Generation Alpha.
Well, Alpha's the next one after,
That's what comes after Z disappears. I don't know, because
that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a self-selection. Yeah.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it.
All
Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James. But it's really going to be fascinating.